a dead mouse in it. In retrospect, maybe I should have. I just thought about this just then. In retrospect, maybe I should have just flipped the mouse over there to him. But it's amazing what goes through your mind as fast as what goes through your mind. And so I looked, I saw it was the cougar or a cougar, and that he was really tight. And there was a knife. I kept a knife stuck in the rafters right above my head. And it was a big long knife. I used it in the garden a lot of times. A lot of times I skin a turkey with it if I had to. But it was like a Freddy Krueger knife. It was a big, long, skinny bladed uh, knife. It was good to cut off broccoli or tomatoes or whatever you was doing out in the garden and all. And I knew how sharp that knife was. And it wasn't stuck in the rafter, it was slid down between the rafters. That knife was right there. And I had just walked past a gun. When you went out that sliding glass door, there was a 22 rifle that sat right in. Um, it sat right in a bunch of coats right in there. You'd have to really know where you was looking, and then the bottom of it was in a bunch of boots. And but there was a 22 sitting in there, and people say, "What you gonna do with a 22 rifle against a cougar?" I said, "Well, I'm gonna tell you something. I ain't gonna shoot it one time. I done learned from my Uncle Butch that I had that thing dialed up with some transmission fluid, slicked that thing up. That's on shuck shells fast as it could eat them." So it was sitting in there, and on the way out there, right there by the freezer, set a lever action or lever action 4570. It was Marlin. That was a really good gun too. And it always leaned up right beside the freezer right in there. So I walked by two guns, and there was a knife above my head, and I had a sliding glass door. So the first thing went through my mind. I said, "Boy, I can see what the paper gonna say if this cougar tried to jump on me and I got a knife. I ain't gonna come out on the clean side of that one." Of course, I was dressed like I always dress. Like we're sitting here right now doing this podcast. I ain't got nothing on but my long handles and some kind of. They've invented some kind of T-shirts that uh, are the most amazing thing known to man. They get wet and then they dry. They don't never stink. It's the craziest thing in the whole world. But anyway, they feel like nylon. They are nylon of some type, but they got all that stuff in them nowadays. So I'm sitting there, and this is my normal outfit. If company comes over, I pull on a pair of shorts over it. But that's the way I was dressed out there. And so first thing I ruled out was a knife, and then I thought, well, maybe I could reach around. The door was about 5 6 foot, 4 or 5 feet something. It was too far. But I said maybe I can reach around there and get my hands on that 22. And I said, no, that ain't gonna work. And I knew the 4570 was out of the question. Cat and me just looking at each other. We got 20 feet of air between us. He looking at me, I looking at him, and it raining. He's sitting up under the eave. And I got a mouse trap with a dead mouse in it. And I'm standing there. and it was just as clear as a light bulb. I remember what Gary Stevens would have told me at that time. As many trees that I had been involved in around and been involved in them being around and stuff, he would have told me that if that cat wanted me dead, I never would have seen him. And I thought about that. I'm saying all this happened in milliseconds. Now it wasn't like you got an hour and a half to think about all this. This is all happening like right now. And that was the last clear thought that flashed through my mind. If that cat wanted me dead, I never would have seen him. And so I looked at him, and it's the way I talk to all critters, most anything, and everything. And I just told him, I said, if you ain't got no beef with me, I ain't got no beef with you. And that son turned his head, and he turned and he looked out in the rain, and then he turned and looked back at me again, and then his tail done one of them cat things where they kind of just waggle it back and forth. It's like I got a good friend of mine that he always says we assling around. We're not hassling around, we assling around. Well, that's what that cat was doing. He just wagged his tail like that. He said, I could read you his thoughts at that moment. He said, I really don't want to get wet right this minute. It was so peaceful up under this thing. He was just sitting there looking out across my yard to see what he could see. You know. But he turned his head, he looked out across the yard, turned his head, looked back at me, waggled his tail, and then he just jumped over the rail. And the rail was 4 foot. Now he was 4 foot back from the rail. And the rail was like 4 foot. And he ain't even studied that. He just jumped over it. And he was gone. And so, of course, it got on to be time for everybody to get up and everything. And Nicole asked, she'd always come in there a lot of mornings. She'd ask, what happened last night? And so she'd come in there that morning. She said, what happened last night? I said, oh, not too much. I said, there's a cougar on the back porch. And you'd have thought that somebody won the lottery in reverse. I mean, it was not good and all that. But that cat hung around that place there, and that particular, I just kind of forgot about him. I never saw him again or anything. We did talk about him with the neighbors at a barbecue, and he kind of moved across the road a little bit, and the man had, I don't know, it's one of them families where they have 5, 6, 7, 8 children and all that, and he was kind of scared for his kids playing in the woods and all, and one of his kids run up on him up in there, and the dad happened to be so close, and the way it all went down, I assumed that the cat said that the kid wasn't worth it and all that. But that was that following fall, and then coming up into that following fall, right in through that time, they burnt some huge slash piles up there where they had been logging. And I didn't realize this. I didn't realize that I had never thought about it, but I didn't realize that mountain lions would den uh, in a big slash pile like that. It makes sense that they got to have some place to get out of the weather and everything like that. I didn't know where I thought that they'd end. I mean, you don't see a cat dig a hole in the ground or anything like that, but they'll get anywhere where they can get up in there and get dry and all that kind of stuff. The way they got it out in the West right now, they've changed the whole face of cat hunting because of the wolf. The introduction of the wolf has created quite a problem for cat hunters because as the hounds treat a cat, the wolves focus on the hounds, and unless men are right there where they can get to the hounds, um, the pack of wolves will come in there and kill all. I mean, all of that will be left is hardware, like the collars, and uh, I know of one particular uh, pack of wolves that came in on a man's hounds, and they left him with the steel parts of the collars. They ate the leather collars, and the wolf has really affected that country, and you hate to say it, but you know, right there in the valley that I lived at, uh, they cost us 50 inches off what would be top end antler growth. In other words, when I moved there, it was nothing for a buck to score 190, and when I left, the a buck that scored 140, was a nice buck. So they have been an extreme detriment in that part of the world, and we'll save that for another episode. But anyway, that is Kitty 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 redone and kind of expanded on a little bit so that maybe some of you that heard the first version will understand a little bit more by hearing the second version. And one thing that's pretty important for me to say too, real quick, is that I mentioned these sponsors. A lot of these sponsors are my friends too. And there's one thing about it. If you hear about it right here, it's gonna work. If it don't work, it ain't gonna be on this podcast. That's just something for y'all to think about. Till later, y'all take care.